I want to hear from the lawyer who represented the first Epstein victim to come forward. I want to speak to the lawyer who has taken Jeffrey Epstein's deposition several times, who has filed motions for sanctions against Epstein, who sat directly across from Epstein, who studied the behavior of Epstein, who saw all of these documents. Rather than speculating or whatever, let's just get it firsthand from Spencer Kuvin of Gold Law. Bring in Spencer right now. Spencer, you famously have deposed Epstein numerous times. All of your cases against Epstein have since resolved, or against the estate, have all since resolved. I want to remind people of one of the moments from one of those depositions, and then I want to talk about what happened with the survivors coming forward with their stories on Capitol Hill. I want to talk about what you're able to share from the litigation in terms of a roadmap from what might be out there. And then, of course, Donald Trump continued today to say that this is one massive hoax, and that he turned over all the documents that exist. He says the 33,000 documents are it. Nothing else is being turned over. But first, let me remind people of that depo that you did. Just a short clip of it. Let's play it.
Could you please give us your name?
Jeffrey Epstein.
Is it true, sir, that you have what's been described as an egg-shaped penis?
Form, vague, indefinite, and I'm going to give you the first warning, Mr. Kuvin, that these types of questions are not only argumentative, but directed in a manner to embarrass Mr. Epstein. If you continue with this type of question, I will adjourn the deposition immediately.
Sir, according to the police department's probable cause affidavit, one witness described your penis as oval-shaped and claimed when erect it was thick towards the bottom but was thin and small towards the head portion, and called it egg-shaped. Those are not my words, I apologize. But as Mr.
Now adjourned.
As Mr. Critton has stated, that this is I'm willing to continue.
So that was the first question of the depo. Epstein and Epstein's lawyer then adjourned. They shut down the deposition. You then moved for sanctions and compelled the deposition to take place again. Walk us through that deposition, and I want to go through your background representing the victims. Then we'll bring it current.
Sure. So thank you for having me on. I do appreciate it. Look, we knew as lawyers for the victims at the time, and there were 4 of us at the time, that he was unlikely to answer any of the questions that we had for him. So there were really only 2 options when we got into getting ready to prepare for the deposition of Jeffrey Epstein. And this, by the way, this was the first deposition that had been taken of him in any of the cases. I had noticed it first, and I had got an opportunity to go first. And with that came a lot of fights back and forth initially with the lawyers for Epstein at the time, saying, look, why do you want to take his deposition? He's not going to say anything. He's not going to talk. And if it's anything regarding the case, he's going to just take the 5th. So why do you even need to bother? So we had to strategize a way that made sense, where we wanted to antagonize him as best we possibly could to see if he would slip up. We knew he was a smart guy, but he was a novice to heavy-handed litigation tactics. So we figured, look, if we come at him hard and heavy on some of the issues that we think might get him upset, then he may slip up and say something stupid. So we had a series of questions, and the psychiatrists and psychologists that we were working with at the time said, go after his manhood. The guy is an egomaniac. He thinks he's God's gift to women. He thinks that he's the smartest guy in the room, and nobody can question him. So go directly after all of that and attack his manhood. And I had the probable cause affidavit where one of these victims, one of my clients who was 14 years old at the time, had described what it looked like. So I could prove that the question was directly relevant. Why does a 14-year-old know what his private parts look like? But more importantly, it attacked his manhood, right? So I came up with this question that I knew I was going to ask right out of the box to see what he would do and how he would react. In addition to that, it gave me the opportunity to file the video with the court so that the public could see him react to that kind of a video, because otherwise they wanted everything in the case to be confidential, secret, and sealed. So it was a great opportunity to do that, and it was a great shot across the bow. I got $800 in sanctions against him for walking out of the deposition, and then he had to come back a second and third time and finish up his deposition, where I got to ask him all kinds of questions about things like the massage, jelly that was found in his bathroom, the large vibrator that was found in his home next to the bed, the multiple sex toys that he had. And I had gone on Amazon before the deposition and purchased every item that the police found in his home, in the bedroom and in the massage room. And I had bought an exact duplicate of it. So during the second deposition, I pulled them out and set them on the table in front of him and started piling up all these sex toys and massage lubricants and just sticking exhibit stickers on them until he had a pile of these things in front of him by the end of the deposition, when he finally got so mad that he said, "Can we just get rid of all this stuff?" It was great.
The deposition that I showed and then the others, when did those take place, and when did the first victim approach you and your practice for representation?
So back in around 2006, I was working in North Palm Beach, Florida, when two parents, a mother and a stepfather, brought their 15-year-old, at that time, 15-year-old daughter in to talk with us. And she first told this story that seemed completely unbelievable, right? I mean, she's telling us a story of some wealthy guy living on Palm Beach Island, where she is taken out there in a taxi cab and asked to give a naked massage, where she has to get nude and then massage his private parts until he finishes. It just seemed completely unbelievable. But, we listened. And at that point, we didn't know that they had already started a criminal investigation. So I reached out to the town of Palm Beach Police Department and got a hold of the lead detective at that time, a gentleman by the name of Joe Riccari, who was a retired New York police officer that decided he was going to work a sleepy job in Palm Beach County. Lo and behold, he gets this case. And he started talking to me about what they had started to find, which was he had sat outside of Jeffrey Epstein's home on Brillo Way and had videotaped tens of women, young girls, being brought by taxi, going in and out of the mansion on a regular basis. So at that point, we started realizing that what our client was telling us might be true. And then that one client turned into two, turned into three, turned into four, and it just kind of built from there.
And then that's when the first meeting with the clients happened. When the first lawsuit was filed, when was that? And then the deposition doesn't take place right away. There's always the discovery fight. So when was the deposition, and when did your cases generally get resolved? And I want to dig into it a little bit, because I think what people need to hear more about is exactly what you said, which is, these are 14, 15-year-old girls who are coming in on taxi cabs to Epstein's spot in Palm Beach, and he's sexually assaulting them. And it's going to be difficult for our audience to hear that, but sometimes when we talk about Ghislaine and Epstein, we talk about it in the context of the broader political sphere versus what was inflicted on the people themselves as well. So anyway, I know I said a lot there, but let's talk first about the case being filed, the depositions being taken, and when those cases were resolved, so people have a time frame.
Sure. So we're talking initially 2006, and my initial client was, as I said, 14 years old at the time she was taken out to the mansion. When I signed up other clients, they were 15 and 16 years old at the time as well. So the victims at that point ranged in age, that we knew about at that time, ranged in age from about 14 at the youngest to about 17 at the oldest. He definitely had a type. We could tell that just by the clients we were signing up. That he wanted girls that either were young or at least looked very young. We initially investigated the case, and with victim number one, it was a criminal investigation. So we worked with that initial client to kind of work through the police investigation. They then started to investigate it from the behalf of the police department and did interviews with our clients. The state attorney decided not to prosecute for some unknown reason at that time. We knew that Alan Dershowitz had flown down and had investigated our clients' like MySpace pages back then. Some people might remember that, MySpace, and had gotten some pictures of them drinking or partying or going out. And they were calling these young girls liars back then. They were basically saying that they were going after a rich guy, making up stories, and that all of this was a lie. They then, after deciding not to prosecute, the chief of police at the time, apologize, can't remember his name, but the chief of police at that time decided he was frustrated with the state attorney, so he then called the FBI. The FBI then picks up the file in about 2007 and assigns a number of agents to start interviewing girls. They interview over 40 young girls, and they had accounts of all of these young girls about what had happened to them. I mentioned that, and I stressed that because that's part of what the Department of Justice is currently sitting on that they haven't released, are all of these raw interviews that were performed by the FBI agents back in 2008. We haven't seen those. So anyways, the FBI does these investigations and they prepare a 54-count indictment. And they're prepared to indict Epstein under sex trafficking charges. When all of a sudden, for some unknown reason, a deal is cut. I, on behalf of the victims, find out about this deal only because I get a call from an FBI agent that I had worked with because I'm speaking with some of my clients. And she said to me, "You need to get to the courthouse right now." I had no idea why. I put on a jacket, I put on a tie, I run down to the courthouse with a copy of the initial complaint we were going to file, which was on behalf of one of my clients. And I wanted to serve Epstein because we didn't know if we were going to be able to find this guy. He was flying around the globe. So I show up in court, and as I'm going through the metal detector, lo and behold, who's walking through the metal detector right behind me? Jeffrey Epstein and his lawyers. We go upstairs, and the secret plea deal is then entered in court. They do it up at the bench with the judge, not allowing anyone else to hear what's going on. He's ushered off behind a door, and then we try to get a copy of that secret plea deal, and they refuse to provide it to any of the victims or the victims' attorneys. We had to fight to get a copy of that non-prosecution agreement, which everyone now has finally seen was an absolute travesty sweetheart deal for this sex predator. And then we get it, and then we have to begin prosecuting the case in state court. And that's when we get to the part where we have the depositions of not only Epstein, but also a couple of the co-conspirators that were involved, as well as the chief of police and the lead investigators.
And those depositions, 2007, 2008, and that time period? Or
Correct. Yes. Right around 2007, 2008. The secret plea deal occurred actually in 2009.
And tell us, if you get Epstein, did he invoke the fifth in all of those depositions when he was not storming out, or did he answer? Did he answer anything? He did. Like, I've seen a deposition
Basic
of him when he was
information.
What'd you say?
Basic information. I mean, he would give his name, rank, and serial number. Basic information, date of birth, where he lived, where he grew up, that kind of thing. But anything that could connect him with any sex trafficking, he refused to answer.
Yeah, because I saw one where he answered. It was like, "Were you friendly with Donald Trump? Would you consider him a friend?" And he said yes. And there was the next question was, "And were you ever with him and girls under the age of 18?" And then he invoked the fifth on questions like that. But let's talk generally. You deposed other any people's names that you can talk about, or is that under a protective order other than Epstein that would be considered co-conspirators?
Well, obviously, Ghislaine Maxwell was somebody that we were looking at the time as a co-conspirator because we knew she was the lead co-conspirator in that sex conspiracy that was involved at the time. But in Palm Beach, there was a young woman by the name of Sarah Kellen and another young woman by the name of Nadia Marcinkova. Those were the two women that were in their mid-20s at the time that were helping to recruit young high school-aged girls to come over to the mansion. And what we determined is that it was a definite hierarchy scheme that he had going. Epstein would not recruit these young girls usually on his own. He would either utilize Ghislaine Maxwell or one of Ghislaine's underlings, which included Sarah Kellen, Nadia Marcinkova down in Palm Beach, but also other women up in the New York area and others out in New Mexico. He would use these girls to recruit other girls. And then when one of the young girls would come over to the mansion, he would then tell them, look, if you don't want to do this again, if you bring me a girl, I'll pay you an extra $50 and I'll pay her $200 if you can get her to come out here. So it was a pyramid scheme of a sexual nature. And that's how he built this huge cadre of young girls that he would convince to come out to the house under, by the way, false premises. You know, he would say, look, I'm friends with Les Wexner and, you know, I can get you a modeling career and, you know, he has Victoria's Secret and you're beautiful. Come on out and talk to me and we can chat about it. That's how he would get them to come out.
You know, and one undisputed fact is that at least on one occasion, and possibly more, because Donald Trump said multiple girls were stolen, were the words that he used, the spa at Mara Lago seems to be an undisputed fact if we were to draft a summary judgment motion at this point, at least as it relates to an underage girl in Virginia Giuffre, who has since died by suicide tragically recently, when she was 17 years old, was working in that spa. And Ghislaine Maxwell, the MO that you've observed in the recruitment process from Donald Trump's own account of girls being stolen at Mar-a-Lago, he seems to be suggesting that at some point in time, he became aware that that was taking place at Mar-a-Lago at the spa there. But the first time that Trump admitted it was a month ago in connection with all of this, where he said, yeah, and he said Virginia Giuffre. Did that come as a surprise to you? And what did you know about like that spa? And was there other spas that Epstein would go to like that, and he would just have his feelers in different locations?
So it's interesting that finally he's admitted this, because Trump has been denying this the entire time, or at least avoiding the questions with respect to Virginia Giuffre. You know, that poor young girl has had to fight before she passed for almost 20 years to prove what she has been saying is true. Everyone has been, denying her truth. And now finally, now that she's deceased, Trump comes forward and admits that she was recruited out of his spa. The bigger question is, why is he employing in his spa at Mar-a-Lago a 14 or 15-year-old girl? That never made any sense to begin with. But secondly, you know, it was the same recruiting scheme that we had known since the beginning of Ghislaine Maxwell going up to young girls and saying, I can make you famous. I work for a man that's very powerful and very rich in the modeling industry. Come talk to us. Come work with us. That's exactly how this entire scheme continued to play out over many years. And whether it was Ghislaine Maxwell that would literally stop cars in the street in New York, pull over to the side of the street and go up to young girls in school uniforms and tell them they should come to the house, they're beautiful, and you know they have a career in modeling, or whether it was one of the girls that Ghislaine Maxwell had trained to do this, younger 20-year-old girls that would be out at clubs or out on the beach somewhere in Palm Beach and see a young pretty girl and say, hey, look, come on out to the house and meet my boss. That's how their scheme worked. And, you know, it was a very typical scheme. And listen, we knew back at that time that Trump was friendly with Epstein for many years. I even issued in one of my cases, a notice of deposition for Donald Trump. Now, the deposition never fully went forward in that case because we had other angles we were going after at the time with Epstein, but we knew he was one of the potential witnesses.
Ghislaine's interview with Trump's former criminal defense attorney, Todd Blanche. Sure, you've had the opportunity to look at that transcript and to hear the audio. You know, as a lawyer, the type of questions that should be asked of Ghislaine based on the types of depositions that you took. You've seen how Blanche approached that, and you've seen Ghislaine's answers where she basically acts like she's the victim. She calls the victims basically liars. And then she says she didn't see anything. She's not even sure how she even was introduced to Donald Trump in the first place. And then she suggests that really what Epstein liked to do with young women was listen to music and that's one of the things that he liked to hang out with them just to see, like, what are the kids doing? It kept him young, as I think is a line that she said. So when you read that, based on the wealth of experience you had representing the first victim who came forward, what was your kind of overall assessment of that?
That it was a joke. The woman is a pathological, convicted liar and sex trafficker. If you're going to cross-examine a woman like that, you've got to presume she's going to lie until she cannot lie any further. You know, his questioning of her was an absolute joke for a lawyer that has any competence, unless he was intentionally allowing her to spew these lies about what happened. He absolutely has no clue what he's doing. You know, when you have someone like a sex trafficker, like Maxwell, like Epstein, that's willing to actually talk, you let them lie, and then you begin to confront them with the hard evidence, with the photographs, with the videotapes, and then their lie, all of a sudden, they get boxed in and they realize they're caught. And then they start coming up with more lies, more excuses that you can then show they're lying. And then eventually, if you can get to that point, they break down and hopefully come out with the actual truth. He did none of that. He did absolutely none of that. He didn't confront her with any of the evidence. He didn't show her any of the evidence that the government has. I mean, it was an absolute joke of an interview. It was a whitewash, and that's all it was.
Let's finally talk about the files. When Donald Trump says these 33,000 files, and some of, you know, his people like the Mike Johnson say these 33,000 files that we produced, that's everything. There's really nothing else out there.
No.
What's the truth? What's the real volume that's out there? And at a specific level, can you kind of go through in a way that oftentimes gets blurred with generalizations? Like, what are we really talking about here that could be released tomorrow and frankly should have been released a long time ago?
So let's talk about what does and what doesn't exist. I can tell you, in working on these files for almost 20 years, I've never seen a quote client list. Okay. It's a misnomer. It's a misdirection. That's not how his operation worked. What would happen is that Epstein would have these young girls. He would pay some of them to come out to the home. He would have some of them who he would sexually abuse himself. And then he would utilize others, and by taking these girls and essentially renting them out to different, very powerful men that would either come to his home or he would send girls to those homes. He didn't keep a list of these people. What he would do is he would get calls from men, powerful men that were coming into town that lived in Palm Beach, for example, and they would call the home and they would say, "Hey, I'm in town." They would then talk to Miss Maxwell. Maxwell would then send a girl out to the house. That's how the operation would work. So if you really wanted to see exactly who was contacting Epstein and trying to get women, you look at his phone books. You look at his phone records. The phone message pads were obtained during the search warrant of the home back then. That's the first place we looked. Secondly, the government has over 3 gigabytes of information. What they disclosed the other day is about that much of this. It is a fraction of information, and everything they gave over, we've had. Everyone has had it. It's been in the public domain since the beginning of these cases. Through a simple public records request, anyone could have gotten the information they've already disclosed. The only thing that they recently disclosed that we did not have back then were some of the additional flight logs that existed for the planes. But what did they do with those? They redacted the name of everybody on the flight except for Jeffrey Epstein. What use is that? It's absolutely absurd what they've released. Here's what they have that they're not giving the public. One, all of the raw interviews that the FBI took of every victim they talked to, and they talked to at least 40 at the time. Where are those interviews? Where are those transcripts? We want to hear what they said, who they said they were abused by, and who was present. Second, They came in and seized all videos at every mansion he had. I know through firsthand accounts from at least one of my clients that there were video cameras all over the Manhattan mansion. She saw them. She saw the recording room where they recorded the videos. There were men, security guards that worked in that room, and there were cameras throughout the house. Where are those videos? Because the FBI's got them. DOJ has them. In addition to that, he's got videotapes because he had cameras at the house in Little St. James down in the Virgin Islands. Where are those videos? You know, all of that should be released. In addition, finally, the FBI prepared, as I said, an over 50 count indictment against Jeffrey Epstein, identifying not only him, but other co-conspirators at the time that was never actually filed. Where's that indictment? If they had filed it, it would have been a public record. So they were prepared to go public with this until they cut the sweetheart deal with Epstein. Let's see that full indictment.
Is there an indictment, do you know, from both the 2006, 2007 period, as well as the second time he was arrested? Would there be two versions of that, you think? Or is there just kind of one omnibus version?
No. So the second indictment, the one where he was arrested in New York and actually died in jail, that indictment, it was public. Once they indicted him on that, it was made public. But that was only 4 victims. That was all. The indictment that was kept secret is the one that they had in Miami. And that indictment, Alex Acosta signed off on. Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Villafana was the one investigating it. But obviously, Acosta was the one that signed off on it. That's the indictment that shows all of the victims that they interviewed and the entire sex conspiracy scheme that they were about ready to prosecute until, for some unknown reason, they entered into this sweetheart deal.
Spencer, you've been very generous with your time, and you've really laid it out in a way I think that hasn't been put out there before. We have 6 million subscribers here. And so often a question I'll get asked, and sometimes I, will say, nah, I've answered it all. But I think for here, if there's anything that you haven't said yet that you think is important, that you want the public to know at this critical moment, I'd love for our 6 million subscribers to hear from you.
Here's what I would say. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't Jeffrey Epstein in a vacuum. His conspiracy of utilizing young girls for sexual conduct involved not just him, but many other individuals that were given young girls, individuals where he was trying to get evidence against other people so that he could curry favor with them and have potentially blackmail against them. Some of those people are still out there, are still unnamed, and still unidentified. The federal government knows who they are, and they're refusing to disclose those names. That's the information the public needs to know, and the public needs to judge for themselves why someone may be at, for example, Epstein's home with a bunch of topless young underage girls, or at his island, similarly, with a bunch of topless underage girls. Those people should be outed, they should be identified, and people like you and the other press should be asking them questions.
Spencer Kuvin, Gold Law, appreciate you. Gold Law is, you still represent victims right now. And so, for those who are watching here, if they have tips or information or anything like that, I mean, you're a practicing lawyer. This is the work that you're doing right now. And you're probably off to a deposition or a court. Based on where you're at, you're probably off to a depo or a court appearance soon. So I won't take up more of your time. Spencer Kuvin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, hit subscribe. Let's get to that 6 million subscriber mark.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.